Hi, I'm Farmer Amy from Fox Run Environmental Education Center, and this is Composting 101. It is a beginner's guide to getting started with composting and building up your soil for your garden. So I made this video with a lot of short clip videos and screenshots that I have used in classes and presentations in the past. So I'm hoping it doesn't feel too disjointed. I am going to put a timestamp little outline in the description box so that if you have a particular area that you want to learn more about, you can go to that. Also in the description box will be some links to blogs that relate to the material that I'm talking about today. So thank you and enjoy. Please like and subscribe to our channel, and we appreciate you being here. All right, so just a few quick notes on the benefits of composting. There are tons of benefits for your soil and for your garden plants when you add compost. And one of the big things is it improves the tilth, the humus of your soil. So your soil has more texture. It's not as uniform, and that allows water to percolate. It allows air to get in there, and it's allowing the nutrients to get to your plants. So the compost contains a lot of nutrients. Those nutrients are going to vary depending on what your compost has been made of. But compost contains the big three: nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, as well as lots of the more minor elements. And so those nutrients are going to go into your garden, into your soil, and then your plants will be able to take them up. So it's improving the texture of your soil, and it's allowing for better air and water flow. It also helps to hold in water when it's dry. So it's good for if you have sandy soil, or if you're just having a drought. A garden with compost is going to do better in that drought than a garden without compost. It's also, the compost has a lot of life in it. So that's, micro animals and vertebrates, as well as bacteria, protozoa, and fungi. All of those things, sometimes we think of bacteria as being a bad thing, but bacteria in soil is necessary. Many of your plants are going to have symbiotic relationships with certain bacteria in the soil. And just like you might have heard about how you want to promote healthy gut bacteria in your own body, or sometimes we'll eat yogurt because we want those good bacteria in our system to help our system. So it's the same thing with your plants. Your plants need certain bacterias, fungi, and those things that are living in the soil that make the soil alive, make the soil nutrient rich, and help your plant to absorb those nutrients out of the soil. And that is going to make for a much healthier plant. Composting is something that happens, naturally in the world. If you think of, or in the environment, if you think of a forest and the deciduous trees and also the evergreens, they're losing leaves, and those leaves fall to the forest floor, and they're giving nutrients to other plants as well as back into the tree. So this is a natural cycle, natural progression, and all you're doing is optimizing on that and utilizing that strategy in your own garden. So I think composting is great. So what we're looking at here is a chart showing greens and browns. So when we talk about layering our compost, we want to have both greens and browns in our pile. So you can kind of think of it, if you're a cook, it's kind of like lasagna or a 7-bean salad. We're going to have different layers of different types of things. So greens, those are things that are bringing nitrogen into our pile, and browns are things that are bringing more carbon. Both of these are important and help with the decomposition process, as well as bringing different nutrients into the pile. So greens are our nitrogen-rich things, and they will include grass clippings, vegetable and fruit scraps from your kitchen, coffee or tea. You can put in tea bags, you can put in the coffee after it's perked, as well as livestock manure. And so browns are your carbons. Browns are typically your drier materials. So leaves, raking up leaves, straw and hay, sawdust, wood chips, corn stalks. So the bulk of your pile should be made of brown materials. So you need about 3/4 of brown materials for the optimum breakdown. And that's pretty easy because the brown materials are going to be bulkier. Now, if you look back at the greens side, where we have livestock manure, it also says when you use straw for bedding and you clean the stall, you are double dipping. So straw or wood shavings are a lot of things that are used in animal beddings, and when you clean the stall, you may probably just take everything out, and that's great. You're adding both green and brown at that time. If you are not raising animals, then you can simply use other greens and layer it with the browns to get the desired effect. So along with the list of items on the green and brown page, we have a number of other things that we can, easily put in the compost pile. They just might take longer to compost. So things like paper, that would be newspaper, or just notebook paper, cards, toilet paper rolls, paper egg cartons. Those things will compost. They do take a little bit longer. I typically recycle a lot of paper products because we have a good recycling program in my area. And also I heat with wood. So in the winter, I use those items to start a fire in the wood stove. Also cardboard. Cardboard is degradable and will break down in compost, but it does take some time. You do want to be careful not to put any cardboard with a wax coating, and to remove all the tape from the cardboard. I also use cardboard, just plain brown cardboard, in the garden to smother weeds and prepare areas for planting in the spring. Other things that take a while to break down and need a nice hot pile, banana skins, they're very thick and fibrous, corn cobs, cotton clothing will break down, but it does typically need a while, and you do kind of need to watch the cotton clothing because some of it does contain quite a bit of bleach, not to mention other chemicals that are used in the manufacturing process. Also, compostable dishware. I actually have not purchased the dishes that are compostable, so I do not have firsthand experience with that. And wooden matches break down fairly easily. So no-nos. Don't add these to compost. So we've all heard not to add dog and cat manure, and that's just due more to parasites. Human manure, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Exotic pet manure, so I'm a wildlife rehabber, and I do have manure from wildlife. Commercial shampoos and cleaners. These things often contain a number of chemicals and so would not be good for your compost. Cigarette butts, diapers, feminine hygiene products. Now I will say diapers that are cloth are a whole different story. So this is referring to diapers and feminine hygiene products that would have plastic linings. Also, those items are frequently have chemicals added to them to be absorbent. So those should not go in the compost. Some other things that are often mentioned not to go in compost, and it's more because they'll attract pets and wildlife to the compost and have animals digging in your compost. That might not be as much of a issue if you are using one of the self-contained composting bins. But if you have an open compost pile, it can lead to problems, and that's meat scraps, dairy, fish, grease, oils, dressings, charcoal, ashes, and magazines and paper that is glossy and has a lot of colored ink or waxing on it is just actually not good for the compost pile. All right, exceptions. So the last page we talked about a number of things that should not go in compost. Excuse me. And we know that everything has an exception. So we do have a composting toilet, and we do compost human manure. I have an article on the website about that. But we compost our human manure separately, and then we use it in the woods on just trees in the woods or on ornamentals, so things that will not be used for food. I also use a natural cat litter and compost that cat litter and litter from the raccoons and other wildlife that I rehab separately. And then that's more buried in the woods because the raccoons in particular do have a number of parasites that we need to be careful about. And fish, I actually do a traditional thing with fish sometimes. I typically have a Three Sisters garden, which is Native American corn, beans, and squash growing together. And I have buried fish in my Three Sisters garden, and which is a very traditional Native American form of composting that was taught to the Puritan settlers when they came to this country. That is usually done in a garden that's fenced, so it doesn't have as many wildlife issues. But burying fish in your garden can lead to wildlife issues. So that is a list of do's and don'ts and things to get you started on your composting. So in our country, we are kind of preconditioned to not like bacteria, not like viruses, not like any kind of microorganisms. But the truth is, we naturally have a lot of bacteria in our body, and there are a lot of good bacteria. And so most of the bacteria and molds and fungi, those things in your compost pile, those are a really good thing. We do sometimes have virus is in compost, and we won't get into the level here in the beginner class, but you can kill most of those harmful things in your compost pile by having it hot enough. But we want to encourage a level of bacteria and fungi because those are the decomposers. Those are the organisms that are going to eat, you know, all of the things, the vegetable leftovers, the manure, the straw, the wood chips, the grass clippings. They're eating those things, they're feeding on them, they are helping those to decompose. And then we kind of work our way up into bigger things, and we work our way up into macroorganisms. And so everybody knows and loves earthworms. Hopefully you love earthworms. They're very important in your compost pile. You might also see ants or beetles in your compost piles, slugs and snails. Those are all good things because they're eating that material. And when they eat it, they defecate it, and you know, it is becoming compost. So it's all breaking down in your garden, and it's all being made accessible to your plants. So the plants have symbiotic relationships with these micro and macroorganisms. And these organisms, in many cases, actually help your plants to take up water, to take up nutrients from the soil. And so not only are they important in the pile, they're important in your garden. And when you put your compost on your garden, you are spreading all these microorganisms and making a really good symbiotic relationship in your garden. And so we want to encourage these. So of course, we do not want to add chemicals. We do not want to add things that have been treated with chemicals to our compost because that is going to inhibit you know, all of these natural life forms. So we want to keep it organic. So there are a number of different ways that you can build a compost pile. You can make a loose pile, you can have some formation to the pile, and you can also use more kind of enclosed bins. So the picture on the left is just a very simple design made with pallets. And the nice thing about this design is that it has 3 compartments. So basically you're moving your compost through each compartment. You can kind of see the fresher stuff on the left-hand side, and it's moving through to being finished. So when you take your finished compost out, put it on the garden, then you're kind of flipping everything over and into the next bin and starting fresh. Another thing that I like to do in the middle there, those are some of my barred rock chickens. And I've just cleaned out the barn. I've laid it, put all the manure and straw and bedding in the garden. I've let it sit for a while, and then I've let the chickens go and have great fun. And they like to scratch around and look for the insects and bugs that are living in the compost, and they aerate it, and they also make more compost because they're eating and pooping, and but they spread it around, and then that sits for a while more and eventually will get tilled in to the soil. On the far right is just a very loose pile, but you can see it's doing its job. You can see the steam coming out from it, so that it is producing heat, and that's what we want. We want the pile to be producing heat and you know, decomposing. So let's see if we can get the next picture up. There we go. So composting bins. So if you're in an urban area, you know, this is more the option for you, although anybody can use composting bins. The important thing with the composting bins, and you can see in the slats in this one on the left and here in the center, the bin still needs to have plenty of air circulation. So you want the composting bin to have ventilation, and that is something important to look for. I'll put some links in the description box of some of the products I like best. And then this one on the right, I think that's kind of a halfway point between a composting pile and a composting bin. It's kind of roughly held together, very simply, yet it is still open, and so you know, might not be for someone who lives in a more urban area. The only disadvantage to some of these composting bins is they do fill up quickly, and so depending on how much compost you're making, you know, you might need more than one. And you can do the same thing with your compost bin and have different levels of the compost in process as you go through. So that's kind of a personal decision on what kind of composting bin you would like to use. All right, so just a quick video about some manure management. You know, I think of composting as a broad spectrum, and so in part what I'm doing with my manure management is raking up manure. So this is my orchard. These are plum trees, and my horse and my goats have been out in the orchard area, and in this front area we've had a very dry late summer, and so their field area ran out of grass, so they came up here, which is fine. So one of the things I do as far as manure management, so I'm raking manure around the root zone of the plum tree here, and I'm also raking up manure to put in the wagon, and we're going to take that manure and put it into raised beds. I have both traditional garden areas as well as raised beds. One of my raised beds here is basically a water trough, and the water trough developed a crack at the bottom so that it does not hold water anymore, and so it has been repurposed to be used as a raised bed. So one of the things I do every year is I rake up manure and I put it into the water trough, and then I add some potting soil, and basically I just let that go through the winter and do its thing, and it is a very productive small area. Last year I had 2 tomatoes and 2 pepper plants in this water trough, and they did excellent. They really like the fact that their roots can shoot down. And so part of what I'm doing in my composting is not necessarily composting per se as we think of it, but I am putting manure, you know, where I will want it for next year. And so, and this is okay, putting just the manure in the raised bed, because I'm not going to be planting everything or anything for several months. So this is October right now. I won't be planting this bed till, you know, April. And so so by that time the manure will have broken down and will be composted. Right, so we're going to talk about vegan composting right now. Vegans do not eat any meat or animal products, and so are doing their composting with strictly plant materials. So I have a lot of friends and clients that are vegans, and I have found out that they're often told that they cannot have a good compost pile without animal manure, and that is simply not true. So if you're a vegan and you're looking for some good plant options, go back into the lists in the earlier lessons, look at the do's and don'ts list, and look at, in the layering section, look at those lists for greens and browns, because it is still important that you're balancing all of that. But most of those lists are plant materials, so your compost is going to be just fine. One of the things, vegans eat a lot of vegetables, and a lot of vegans I know do a lot of vegetable preparation. So you're filling up your, compost bin with a lot of vegetable scraps, and those might add a little bit more moisture to your compost than you want. So one thing I do recommend, if you fill up your little in the kitchen compost, you go to dump it on your compost pile outside or in your bin, dump that all out, and then add something like straw or wood chips. Straw is great because the stalk is hollow, and so it also brings in a lot of air. So after you dump in, a number of vegetative and fruit, leftover food kinds of things in the compost pile, add some straw or something, from the brown list, something that's a little bit bulkier. If you feel your compost does not have enough nitrogen or you want to give it a boost, alfalfa meal is a great thing to add to your compost pile. It'll give you a nitrogen boost. It's a legume. It has a lot of nutrients. It'll be great for the bacteria and the worms and things that you are wanting in your compost pile. So that's a great additive. Also, I have a friend that is a vegan that has a rescue organization, and so she does use manure from those rescue farm animals that she has. We have Rocket at Fox Run. If you've ever followed any of our social media, Rocket is a rescue horse who thinks he's a rescue dog, and he kind of has free reign, and so on nice days I go out with my wagon and my shovel and my rake, and I just pick up his poo and I put it where I want it, where that might be on the compost pile, and that might be in a raised bed or somewhere. But there are just an infinite number of plant sources that are great for your compost pile. Grass clippings, weeds. Another thing that's really good for the compost pile is legumes. And so as a vegetarian in your garden, you will probably be wanting to grow more peas and beans because they're a good source of protein for your body. But those, when they are done producing, those are great for your compost pile. And so just, pile them on, and your micronutrients will be very thankful for you. So if you're a vegan and if you have some specific composting questions and you want to, ask them in the comments section, go ahead and I will answer them for you. So thanks for watching.